The story begins in the dungeon, hands and blood, and an interesting weapon tip. There we see a completely beaten guy. He is in a very precarious position because now he is confronted with both light and darkness. For some reason, they have joined forces, and at this moment he finds himself before the goddess of light and the king of demons. At this moment, he wonders why this angel has formed an alliance with the demons. She says that humans had no chance of defeating them, so in the end, it was better to join forces with them. However, this angers our hero, and he yells at her, calling her a failure for betraying humanity. But then the Demon King says that this guy talks too much, and now he's going to finish him off. At that moment, he raises his finger, causing our protagonist to fly into the air. Then he is squeezed to a certain point, squeezed to such an extent that he almost explodes. At that moment, he couldn't take it anymore, and ultimately dies. He exploded at the end after all. When he entered the afterlife, a system appeared, informing him that he had ultimately received the system of the Demon Lord. Not understanding anything, he asks what is going on, but wakes up in a different place, in the sanctuary of demons. Yunyun opened his eyes and realized that he was in a completely unfamiliar place. There were several coffins next to him, but he doesn't pay much attention to them, because, looking to the side, he notices a system screen informing him that he has now become the Lord of Demons. But this makes him sad, because he always tried to fight against it, and now he has become the very thing he fought against. However, if you think about it, this power is not so bad because he could use it to take revenge on the angel who betrayed him by siding with the Demon King. Now that this power is in his hands, he is sure that he will be able to take revenge. Yes, he needs to become stronger, and he will become the Lord of Demons. The moment he accepts this, he moves forward. The system asks him to stand in the center of the altar. The moment he steps into the center, lightning strikes one of the coffins in front of him. At that moment, everything begins to heat up, and all this energy flows into our protagonist. Now looking at the angel of light, he promises that the angel will wait for him, because he will definitely come back to take revenge. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to another location, a mountain, where we see someone mourning his friend Yan Yun Chung. He is sad because, in essence, he abandoned his friend. Here we are introduced to him, a level 2 adventurer named Su Dingfeng. As he stands there wondering what to do with his life, he hears a voice asking him why he is doing this, and asks the guy, why isn't the gravestone made of stone? Confused, he turns around and sees our hero alive and well. At that moment, his jaw drops. How is this possible? He's alive, and he's standing right in front of him now. Even though he says he just went fishing, he starts to cry, and then sobs because he had been coming to this place for 5 years to visit him. But our hero is shocked. How did 5 years pass? He was at the altar for only a short time. Suddenly, the scene changes to a natural landscape with a statue. Then they get on a motorcycle and start descending the mountain until they see a statue of an angel. At that moment, the protagonist asks what it is. His friend replies that the angel fought some demons and defeated them all. As a sign of gratitude, a statue was erected in her honor. But the protagonist considers this a farce. So he tells his friend the whole truth, and now his friend believes that the angel was actually a villain. But now that he has returned, his friend wants to take him to a new restaurant that has just opened. However, our hero refuses, saying that he needs to go home to get some clothes and that he will wait for his friend at the entrance to the dungeon. His friend is upset because going to the restaurant would be cheaper than going to the dungeon. Now you have to pay to enter the dungeon, which annoys our protagonist. Looking at the paper in his hand, he sees that the first level dungeon costs 10,000 coins and an 80% commission. His friend, nicknamed Zhu Te, says that there is nothing strange about this, as it has been going on for 5 years. At that moment, annoyed, Su grabs him by the collar and pulls him back. He asks Yun Kun to calm down a little, because the enemy has many allies on his side. After a while, he begins to tell a story about how thousands of years ago, there was a battle between humans and the undead. But one day, an archmage named Layla sealed the entrance to one of the dungeons, giving humanity some peace. However, over time, the seals on these dungeons weakened, allowing the monsters to escape. Chaos reigned among humanity until adventurers appeared, and Lys fought the monsters. But in one of these adventures, his group, his friend, appeared, and he ended up commenting that he almost died in this dungeon. But then they enter the dungeon, and inside he comments that now you have to pay 80% to enter. This was good because after the Goddess of Light destroyed 100% of certain demons, the best dungeons were no longer considered dangerous or something that ultimately caused problems. So these people, interested in charging for anything, decided to choose dungeons to charge anyone who wanted to enter. At this point, he also thanks his friend for paying for the entrance to the dungeon, but his friend is confused because he is being thanked even though he has always treated them as poor people. Ignoring this, he ends up wondering why his friend dragged him into this dungeon. His friend then says that he will need his help, as he needs to go to a certain place to find a powerful opponent. His goal is to kill him and turn him into his shadow, but now they don't have time to talk, because a powerful monster is heading their way. And at that moment, a scorpion appears. His friend, seeing the scorpion, asks him to stay and watch his show. Having said this, his friend begins to run toward the scorpion. As he approaches, the scorpion attacks, but he uses his shield to defend himself, and then slips underneath it, where he manages to cut the lower part of the scorpion, defeating it. Watching from afar, our main character realizes that Jifen, his friend, is a living shield. But even though his fight was mostly successful, he is still quite weak. He needs to level up a lot to reach a high enough level. At this moment, our main character shouts to his friend to go ahead and kill more monsters, because that way he will be able to level up more. And he obeys. He goes and kills the scorpions that were around one by one. After a long time, only the carcasses of the creatures remain on the ground. After a while, our hero finally reaches the second level together with his friend. His friend is already celebrating, saying that he wasn't so bad after all. Then a screen appears showing Yang Yunchai's status. At this point, he hasn't achieved much, but at that moment, he decided to show his friend something quite interesting. Clearly intrigued, his friend wonders what it is. At that moment, he already knew his ability. The scene switches to our hero, who orders the fallen creatures to rise and follow his commands. At that moment, the beam moves toward the scorpion carcasses on the ground, and then the ground split open specifically for the scorpions. After a few minutes, they rise. His friend, seeing this from our protagonist's perspective, is speechless. After a few minutes, two scorpions appear, now under the control of our protagonist. And when the hero sees these monsters transformed into human form, he is surprised that the transformation has taken on a human appearance. But in the end, this ability became so cool for him. Now he orders his pets to go ahead and kill all the monsters around them. And as he commanded, they begin to run and kill one after another. As he advanced, he noticed that the defeated monsters were of the same level, but the summoned monsters managed to defeat them very easily. His friend doesn't even pay attention to this and instead focuses on something else. These monsters could stay in the dungeon at a great distance, meaning he could lie in bed and his monsters would still farm for him in the dungeon. Having said that, Sue asks our protagonist if he has become a super genius with such words. When he consulted with the system, of course, our hero thought the same thing. However, this did not happen because, for now, the dungeons needed an adventurer inside. But at the moment, he doesn't care much about that, because now his goal is to go deeper into the dungeon to kill the Tail King. But while they are talking about this, something is approaching them. They look ahead to see what it is and realize that it is Coco, one of the monsters under our protagonist's control. Coco apologizes because they were unable to defeat the Tail King. Hearing the apology, the protagonist says that it's okay since the monsters were only level 1, and it was very unlikely that they would be able to defeat the boss. So they move forward and eventually reach the boss. The Tail King turns out to be a little stronger than they imagine. His friend, plucking up his courage, asks our hero to stay behind because he wants to deal with this himself. Our main character, knowing that this monster is strong, asks him to step aside. He wanted to try something new, and besides, his friend was no match for this boss. At that moment, he wants to draw the boss's attention exclusively to himself. So he points his finger and calls him, which annoys the boss, and he starts screaming and kicking. Now that the guy got what he wanted, he asks his friend to do the same as him. Then he starts running in one direction, and his friend starts running in the other. At that moment, the boss chooses a specific person to chase, our protagonist. At that moment, he almost managed to catch our hero, but before he could grab him, he activated his magic eye and directed his power into the creature's mouth. Then he shouted to his friend Yingfen to finish him off. At that moment, he began to run as fast as he could from behind. After a few minutes, he found the weak spot of this monster, this boss. He took his sword and stabbed it inside. The boss, feeling the power of the sword, screamed in pain. At that moment, knowing that he was about to be killed, he jumped down. But because he jumped, the ground cracked completely. At that moment, both of them looked inside and realized that they had done significant damage. However, what they wanted to achieve killing the boss, was still not accomplished. To defeat him, they needed to pierce the boss's thick armor. But our protagonist had a plan for that. His plan was to attract the boss's attention and then immobilize him, and Sue would finish him off. Our main character suspected that the boss would appear behind him to catch him, as his intuition was somewhat unique. He simply asked his friend to stand firm, holding his sword, and as soon as he could, he would need to pierce the monster's weak spots. So following this crazy idea, he ended up carrying out his plan. Everything happened just as he had predicted. The boss appeared behind him, and at that moment, we see the protagonist's friend point his sword at the monster. He managed to pierce another weak spot of the monster, wounding it. But even that might not have been enough to stop this monster. The boss then used his other paw to try to strike the protagonist's friend. The quick-witted friend used his shield to defend himself, but it was pierced. Looking ahead, he noticed a claw near his eye. But looking the other way, he noticed our hero. The protagonist commented that he could hold off the monster for a certain amount of time, so Sue needed to act quickly. Hearing this, he flew towards the monster, holding his sword, which was still stuck in it. Grabbing the sword and running, he began to cut the monster from the inside. He managed to inflict a large cut on it. In the end, he successfully defeated the monster. After defeating this monster, he gained some abilities and additional items in his characteristics. Moreover, he also received a shield and a dagger, both of which were very powerful. Now that the boss had been defeated, SU saw that the drop was good and understood why GG had chosen this dungeon for his first entry. Our hero only commented that he had seen this type of boss in other dungeons, the high-level ones. So he thought that even low-level dungeons might have similar bosses. Now he showed the shield and the dagger, and he wondered which of the two his friend would choose. He chose the shield. Soyeon decided to take the dagger, which confused Sue as he had never used one before. But he said that he had some free time and practiced with it a little. At that moment, they began to think that with the profit they had made here, they would be able to pay off all their debts. Then the scene switches to where they meet Melonhead. Shoda took almost 80% for letting them enter the dungeon. Now he wanted to take even more because of the food they brought him. He also began to demand other things, such as the experience points they had earned for killing any monster. Increasingly annoyed, the main character listened to Melonhead's words. He wanted to attack him, but his friend stopped him. In a rage, he began to draw his sword, but then stopped. He saw a black aura behind Ju, who politely asked him to leave. He also looked back, where he noticed the presence of several level 1 bandits. Realizing that he couldn't fight them now, he retreated. But before leaving, Ju-tae said that the main character had wounded his precious heart. Now realizing that they had a very interesting shield, Ju-tae demanded that they give it to him as payment for his commission. Our hero left and asked his friend to give the shield to Melonhead, saying that he would return both the shield and everything else that Ju-tae had taken. Night fell, and the scene switched to where the bandits were. They were watching the news. The news featured a report about adventurers disappearing inside a dungeon. Then one bandit asked another why Ju came to this shack in the mountains every year, and the other replied that he should go up and ask him himself. However, suddenly they began to feel a chilling breeze from below, and down there we could see someone, the figure of Melonhead, eating something interesting. The scene then shifts outside the house, where we see the two killers noticing that something strange is going on. At first they ignore it, as they are essentially in the desert, and nothing usually happens in the desert. But then looking ahead, we notice that there is a rock on the hood of the boss's car that fell out of nowhere. Our hero appears behind the patrolling gangster, and the scene switches to inside the house, where we see the guy who was outside. He enters but looks a little dazed. His companions ask him what's wrong. Maybe he's had too much to drink. And when they look closer, they see that something bad has happened. At that moment, something jumps out from behind him. Both look up but don't have time to react, because our main character jumps and hits him right in the head, throwing the adventurer back across the room. And he fell right out of the window. The bandit who was next to him tried to use fire magic to hit our hero, but it was useless. With his speed, he easily dodged the first attack and ran towards him. Moments later, we see him strike, cutting the guy to pieces. Now that everyone has been defeated, there is one left. He asks why he is doing this, but now he uses his magic eye, which does something as he runs towards this guy. The man doesn't understand what's happening. He only feels immense fear, so he just sits down. Meanwhile, our hero moves forward. Before going inside, he notices a very cold atmosphere, but he can't stay behind. He opens the door. And at that moment, he is surprised to find several adventurers in a terrible situation. He realizes that the missing adventurers were right here, and that the adventurers' boss, Jute, had been devouring them all this time. But now that he is in this room, he will be the next to be eaten, especially since he is only a level 2 adventurer. His end will be here, but upon hearing this, he simply begins to laugh. Then he invites the figure to a good fight, commenting that he will join this battle. After all, Ju was in the mood to prepare dessert, and the main character appeared at the perfect moment for him. Ju starts the fight by shooting a fire beam at him, but our hero dodges to the side, leaving the fat man very surprised and confused by what he is doing, until he sees him in front of him with a dagger in his hand. The protagonist manages to land several blows. However, at that moment, he notices something strange. The level and speed of the figure did not match what he saw. He sees the sword approaching him. At that moment, the guy appears in front of him and finds it interesting that he can use fire magic and levitate. The fat man was in shock. After all, his glasses were already broken. Now the protagonist wants to make him one of his servants. But the chubby guy, finding himself in such a situation, doesn't like it and asks him to stop. Suddenly, something appears in his mouth, leaving him very surprised. The guy was also surprised and looked up. At that moment, an explosion occurs in the middle of the moon. Then we observe the appearance of something mysterious, with a golden badge with spikes on his belt. Only later do we learn that this monster that appeared before him was a level 2 demon. The demon was shocked to see that the fat man had found a strong opponent, but it was some kind of second-level adventurer. He thought about returning to that body until he looked to the side and noticed that only ashes remained of the fat man. Finding this boring, he now realizes that he needs to find another host. Looking to the side, our main character uses his skill in his direction, trying to catch the monster off guard. The spell takes a long time to absorb him. But no, he fails. The monster's speed was much higher than our hero's movement. Its speed was so high that he couldn't even see it clearly in front of him. At that moment, something flew in from that direction. Seeing this, he jumped up and, jumping up, was surprised to find that there was a hole in the ground. He realized that it was not just fire, but fire that instantly burned the ground as expected of an elite second-level spell. The people on the first floor were most likely not residents. The flames instantly wiped them off the face of the earth. Moreover, he noticed that the space was too cramped, which gave a fire user like him a complete advantage in this situation. Therefore, he needs to lure him to another, safer place. But we see the demon chasing him. The monster shouts that running into open terrain or into the forest won't change anything. His fire was not ordinary. At this moment, the monster uses a fire skill aimed at him, but the main character continues to run, dodging through the forest. Continuing to dodge, he eventually disappears, leaving the figure quite surprised. He asks where the guy went. He looks up and sees him above. The protagonist strikes from above, almost hitting him, but the monster quickly dodges the attack. Nevertheless, the protagonist manages to hit the monster, which angers him greatly. The monster prepares fire in his hand to strike our protagonist directly, but before it can strike, our hero dodges at the last second. Grabbing part of the monster's clothing, he uses it as a way to escape faster, which ultimately works, leaving the monster even more enraged. It starts running faster towards our hero. Our main character also starts running, and they both meet in the middle of the forest. Upon meeting, the monster uses its fire to try to hit our protagonist, but the most it manages to do is hit a few trees. As the main character runs, we see the destruction left behind. Continuing on, he reaches a point where there is nowhere else to run. It's a dead end. With the protagonist cornered, we see the monster appear behind our protagonist. Now that he's reached a dead end, the bastard wonders what the guy will do to escape. The monster wants to see where he will hide from his fiery ability, which he launches in his direction. This fire is directed at our hero, sweeping away everything in its path. Everything is destroyed, including a nearby mountain, which ends up splitting in half. Everything turns to dust. The monster is saddened by this because the guy seemed very interesting to become his vessel. The last one he chose was a fat guy with a bunch of diabetes, and among other illnesses, it was very difficult for him to stay in that body. Now he told himself, no more fat guys. Now he would hunt for those with big muscles and good health. At that moment, as he thinks about leaving, he feels a tremor. Then he looks down and notices a crack. Something emerges from this crack and grabs him, immobilizing him. In this situation, he asks to wait a minute, as that person should have already turned to dust. Then he looks the other way. and notices a hole, and it is through this hole that the protagonist managed to escape. At this moment, irritated, the demon comments that even what just happened to him will not be able to stop him. Then he starts using his fiery power again. But at that moment, a chain appears and moves towards his neck. Looking ahead, he sees our hero, who tells him to stop moving. He exudes enormous pressure, forcing him to stand completely still and frightened. At that moment, he asks his tame pet to let the guy go. The pet obeys, and as soon as he is released, he stands quietly. Our hero demands that it give up all the resources it received earlier. The monster simply obeys, handing over the shield and other interesting weapons, as well as a huge collection of gold that it had accumulated earlier. At that moment, it gave up everything that the fat man had, the gold and resources that it had also taken from our protagonist. But if he wanted more, he just had to go to the guild, as all the best stuff was kept there. Looking at these gold bars, he realizes that by selling them, he will get 10 million on. It was amazing to see that the demon managed to get all this in a low-level dungeon. However, by focusing too much on what was beneath him, he lost his concentration and the chain ended up breaking. A system message appears, saying that danger is near and he'd better hide. At that moment, the monster activated its fire ability and frantically launches it at our hero. But before it can hit him, the protagonist ducks. Immediately after that, he grabs the sword he received from the system and finishes off the monster with it. In the end, he manages to defeat this level 2 demon, gaining experience and also reaching level 3. Now he can enter any dungeon. Yan looks at what is lying on the ground. He orders the creature to get up and follow his commands. At this moment, he receives 3 summons, but now he only has room for 1. Looking at his level, he realizes that the level of the summoned creature matches his own, so he doesn't need to train the monster from scratch. But the monster immediately asks for his first orders, wanting to know what he should do to fulfill his mission. At that moment, he knew that today's dungeons were all monopolized by some illegal guilds, so he was looking for dungeons that these guilds had not yet discovered. He knew that the creature next to him was a monster, so he wondered if such a monster could reveal where his companions were. If so, it would be better to take it there, as he could level up significantly and become much stronger. But here the scene shifts to another location. Someone arrives at our hero's friend's house. It is a delivery person. He hands him a package, but he is puzzled because he was not expecting anything. So he takes it inside, where he notices that it is heavy. At first he even thinks it might be a brick, but it is not. At that moment he opens it and is surprised to find his shield. Above it, he also sees several gold bars. But among these items, he finds a letter saying that the shield he needed had been returned. This letter is from Yan Yongkong. He cannot believe it. His shield has been completely restored. The gold bars came with it. Holding them, he feels happy, as it is the first time he has held such gold. And now he considers himself rich. At the door, we see our hero's summoned creature, who comments that the delivery has been completed. It was the same demon servant, Ponti. Our hero thanks him, but wonders if this was really the address he mentioned earlier. After all, the place where he is one of the temples of the God of Light. Why was he sent to this particular place? The summoned creature continues, saying that the power of the Angel of Light is supported by many temples, both large and small. Closing one of these temples means a loss of power. If he really wanted to attract the attention of monsters, he had to do it. Knowing all this, he could now move forward. Then he orders the scorpion to enter invisibility mode, and it obeys. The scene returns to where the fat man was fighting our hero. Now Ju Tong, a third-level adventurer and treasury chief, wonders where his brother is. The agents comment that it was impossible to find him. In addition, they found traces of previously unseen fire magic, which hindered the investigation. But he orders them to continue the investigation and find the person responsible for what happened to his brother. At the moment, however, the most important thing is not even the deaths of those people or his brother. It is the 10 million he was stolen by a certain person. Moreover, if that goddess of light finds out that 10 million onis were stolen, he's completely finished. Meanwhile, we see the scene switch to another location. Here we see the defiled third-level guardian of light being defeated. After defeating him, he gains 8 experience points, but based on his combat experience, he issues a final warning. The protagonist orders the guard to surrender. He was once part of the faction of light and knows perfectly well what is going on. However, this does not change anything for him. At that moment, the knight grabs his spear. And knowing that our protagonist will not surrender, he tries to attack him. So in the end, Yan delivers the final blow, separating the head from the body. Then he feels a little distracted until another defiled guard appears, and at that moment he grabs his sword to strike him. But at that moment, he turns as quickly as he can and uses his eye, which ultimately causes the guard to lose his concentration and fall off the bridge from one powerful blow from GG. But taking down one wasn't enough. So other guards appeared, demanding that he be removed as quickly as possible. He uses his eye again to try to strike, but the guards now used a shield that prevented his power from reaching them. Realizing this, he jumps up, using the head of one of the guards as a springboard, and ends up kicking another guard standing right next to him in the face. At that moment, we see another guard appear from the side with a sword in his hand, trying to strike our hero, but he easily dodges, cutting both of them in half. Meanwhile, in the background, we see the chief guards shouting for someone to stop this guy. He was alone, so how could they not do anything to him? In response, a higher-level guard appeared, trying to attack. At that moment, he stepped forward and the guard in front noticed it. The boss struck the ground with his enormous weapon, which sent a huge wave of energy forward. Well, all these guards were ultimately destroyed by a single blow from the boss standing right behind them. Now that this has happened, the protagonist comments that in order to defeat a monster or even a single person, he had to destroy many of his subordinate guards. At this time, Ponty is preparing to search for dungeons. And now ahead of us, we see the smoke clearing, and in the middle of it, we find our protagonist, protected by his pet. Now under protection, he shows his middle finger and comments that the guy is trash and too weak. For this adventurer, he was considered a fool and will now regret stepping into this clean place. At that moment, he grabs his axe and prepares for action. That's when the scene switches to another place, where a head flies off a person's body and falls at the feet of a curly-haired guy. The shadow approaches him, and the poor guy begs not to be killed. We find the guy from the past looking for a certain person. He questions the man lying on the ground, asking if he happens to know a guy who was in the same guild 3 years ago, whom he shows on his cell phone. However, as soon as he showed him the phone, the man remembered this guy. It was Su Jingfeng. Knowing that he knew the truth, the level 4 adventurer killer Ne Tahu asked where this guy lived. Looking down, the man realized that if he gave the wrong location, he would most likely die. His comrade, who was a strong fighter, died from a single blow, so he ended up revealing Su's location, apartment 305 on such and such street. Now he asks if he can leave, and the man, of course, tells him to get lost. Curly, of course, runs away. But at that moment, we see the happy face of this guy saying it was a joke. At that moment, he raises his finger, and at that moment, the running guy suddenly stops. Something pierced him. It was the killer's energy, and split him in two. At that moment, Ne had to head for his next target. The scene then switches to where Jingfeng was. Jingfeng was in a good mood at home until he heard the doorbell ring. He opens the door and wonders who this guy is. And the killer behind the door asks with a huge smile if he is Jingfeng. But the scene of our story changes again. Now it's a temple, we see the boss, and below the boss is our protagonist. He was walking forward with his dagger, and the system showed a new level. Now he had reached the 4th. At that moment, the boss wonders how someone could have allowed an insect like him to enter his territory. Where is the commander? However, the protagonist had an answer for that. He clapped his hands. At that moment, our main character puts his hand behind his back, sticking it into the portal. Moments later, he pulls something out of it and throws it at the boss. The boss then realizes that at that moment, he defeated an elite 3rd-level warrior. He saw that this insect that had invaded his territory was no ordinary insect. At that moment, he rises, pulling his sword out of the system. Then the knight simply said that the others were weak, and now he had no idea who he was facing. Then we see him use his eye. And at that moment, a wave is directed at this knight. But what had worked on the weaker knights had absolutely no effect on him. He was surprised by this. But moments later, we see the knight jump at him, diving down to catch our hero. But he jumps back, dodging the powerful attack that tears up the ground beneath him. And yet the knight prepares a new attack. To avoid the blow of this other attack, our hero pulls his dagger out of the system, holding back the blow for a few moments. But he is still thrown far into the sky by the force of the blow. Then he realizes that this boss may be a little harder to defeat than the others he has faced. From above, we see the knight rushing towards him, trying to grab him in midair. But our main character doesn't stop there. He uses the fire of his summoned creatures, directing it at the knight. The knight, however, uses his sword as a shield. completely protecting himself from the fire. But then we see that the fire caused an explosion. And yet this explosion did not even touch the knight. The effect of the fire, however, was quite strong. He noticed this. His level was much higher, as was his defense. But why did he end up losing to this low-level fire ability? At that moment, our hero appears with his dagger, taking advantage of one of the openings that appeared. Striking from behind, he wonders if it was a dirty trick. At that moment, he takes out his dagger and says no. At the same time, he says that the goddess of light, who until recently was an ally of humanity, suddenly decided to betray humanity. So it doesn't mean anything. At this moment, we see that the knight is not so easy to defeat. His sword-wielding hand trembles with rage. At that moment, he turns to our hero to quickly catch and kill him. But our main character dodges and his blow hits the target. The main character realizes that he has struck a vital point with his dagger. How is he still alive? Then he notices that the hero is healing himself. He saw something that piqued his interest. It was healing. He had never seen anything like it. The boss moves towards him at breakneck speed and ends up landing precise blows on our protagonist, knocking him back. Now he grips his sword in orders to destroy this adventurer and turn him to dust. He releases a giant aura of holy light at him. The aura flies to reach our protagonist from afar. From the ground, we watch the cutting beam of this knight's sword on the islands. Now that he has won, he can return to his throne. But on his way back, he wondered what was going on. This adventurer was different, and he remembered him. He didn't even feel his presence when he entered his territory. Well, everything he said was true. He heard a voice. It was our main character. He couldn't believe it. How was he still alive? But our hero suddenly began to tell a story. Many years ago, he was a novice. But in one of his rookie adventures, he was robbed by a team that stole a very good magic stone from him. The people who robbed him were part of a guild called X-Shipper. One of his friends ended up dying during this incident. The person who committed this atrocity was not punished at the time because he held a high status in the guild. But at this moment, he wonders if the person responsible for this is here in this place. And the person responsible for taking certain measures was none other than this very knight. He says that the weak must remain beneath him, or simply die. And as proof of this, he wants to destroy our hero. This time, he will unleash a power much more powerful than last time. Before, he underestimated the guy, which allowed him to survive. But this time, everything will be different. He infuses his sword with much more aura. As soon as he filled it with this aura, the sword grew to gigantic proportions. This place is part of his territory, and anyone who enters without his permission is subject to subjugation. At that moment, in order not to be caught, he retreats. He realizes that he can really feel the power emanating from this sword, but he has a trick that can still be used to defeat him. Therefore, he utilizes one of his abilities, a shield. The knight wonders if he is really sure that he can defend himself from his sacred sword with this small shield. At that moment, he decides to test it, and he throws his sword at our protagonist. The sword meets our hero's shield. The shield held firm. From a distance, the knight realized that this was a third-level guy. But the fact that he possessed a shield of such a level was surprising. Unfortunately for him, his end was near. Our protagonist's shield was reinforced, causing the knight's sword to break completely, shattering into pieces. Then we see an explosion. The knight realizes that too much mana has been released. After a while, the explosion subsides, and he stands in the center of the explosion, completely unharmed and alive. This surprises the knight. How did he survive again? This sword alone had the power to destroy any adventurer. Our hero said that Bug Flam de Panjin's ability was transformed into a shield, and in fact, the result was almost the same. However, this ability has a weakness. His opponent must be at a level close to his own. Otherwise, he will most likely lose. But this time, it was his turn to counterattack this guy. However, in order to defeat this knight, he would have to use all of his remaining mana. So he used all his remaining mana, and at that moment, a beam of fire flew towards the knight. Seeing this, the knight tries to grab his sword and seems to be trying to grab his shield to defend himself. The fire approached, but there was a shield that protected him. The blow landed, and at that moment, he felt its full power. He wondered where all this power came from. We see the fire intensify. From the island, we see how big the fire has become, bigger than the power of his sword before. After a while, our hero's fire disappears. In the center of this fire, we find a knight who ends up praising our hero, saying that he was quite a strong adventurer. Among all the adventurers he has trampled, this one was the strongest. But unfortunately for him, It was nothing. These scratches, these cuts, all of this could heal in minutes. And then he notices something. He looks at his hand and wonders what it was. At that moment, we see an aura emanating from him. His hand is not healing. He wonders what will happen if there is no more healing for him. He asks himself what effect was cast on him when that fiery ability was used. But this time he can't take it. He falls to his knees. This was the second time he had fallen to his knees, and the main character noticed it. He approaches this knight and now wonders why the holy knight has twice knelt before an adventurer like our main character. Knowing that he will be defeated by this adventurer, he apologizes and asks for forgiveness. But at that moment, our hero tells him to shut up because he hasn't finished his story yet. After a certain event involving his friend, he ended up losing his entire job. And now companies would not hire him because a certain family was against his friend. So people behind his back wondered why he had offended the Jew family, since this family was quite influential, turning his life into complete ruin. It would have been better for him to die right away. Because of this whole situation with his friend, he ends up making a very sad decision. Gigi takes his friend Sue and goes to his house. But when he arrives, he knocks on the door, but no one answers. So he just breaks into the house. And in the end, he finds his friend there. They were too late. Unfortunately, now in another world, he raises his sword and wonders if it was worth forgiving him after burning that thing in front of him. At that moment, the knight ends up saying not to kill him, and at the same time, asks to demand anything from him because he will do whatever he wants. Our main character even agrees. At that moment, the knight notices that he has stopped paying attention to the fight, so he could take the opportunity to attack him, as he still had some magic left. But just as he is about to do so, our main character grabs his own sword and strikes him. After doing so, our hero says that he can follow him, but only after death. Yan. He has already reached the 5th level. Speaking of his servants, he ends up thinking that one of his other shadows was in the dungeon, and there has been no news from her yet. So he contacts his other shadow and asks himself what it is doing. Where is its experience? Where are you, Demon Ponti? The demon on the other end comments that he's in a pretty tough spot. She was confronted with an adventurous murder, while his friend was holding his bloody side, and was in a very critical situation. The servant stood firm and did not let the purple bastard pass. The hunter who was pursuing our protagonist's friend wonders who this guy is, but the demon says that Netahu can kill anyone he finds in this city, except for one person, his master's friend. At that moment, our protagonist's friend realizes that Yun-kun has made an excellent friend, a really good friend who even protects him. So he asks him to be very careful because the guy in front of him was strong. But to understand everything, we need to go back a few hours. At that moment, he was at home, relaxed until that guy appeared. The killer grabbed him by the face and threw him out of the window, and he ended up losing consciousness from the blow. And then he woke up in an abandoned parking lot. The killer who was there disappeared, but reappears in front of him a few minutes later. He is surprised by his speed, which is perhaps even faster than that of our protagonist. He is thrown back. At that moment, while he is being thrown back, the killer summons something into his hand, and at that moment, he falls completely into that thing. But before she catches him, he manages to dodge at the last moment, hovering in midair, and braced his feet so as not to fall onto the aura's bayonet. The adventurer wonders how he managed to do it, because it was an invisible blade. He says he didn't see it, but only felt it and knows he must be careful. This adventurer is a little strong, and at the same time, he cannot allow our protagonist's friend to die. Therefore, he must give it his all. The adventurer nearby tries to punch him in the face, but he manages to dodge at the last moment. However, that was not enough, because he gets kicked in the face, which throws him back. Being thrown back, he ends up falling, but another invisible blade appears again. But he dodges again. He wanted to use his demonic form because with it he could easily defeat this guy. But the main character tells him not to do it. At that moment, the adventurer directs the invisible blade upward with his hand, right at the guy, cutting him in half, leaving only strawberry jam on the blade. At that moment, he falls and gets upset, seeing that he couldn't even protect our protagonist's friend. The adventurer approaches and comments that his blade is not standing still either. It was moving. At that moment, the demon servant received a notification from his master with the possibility of summoning him. The adventurer furiously asks him to finally die. And as the blade approaches, the demon activates the summoning of the demon lord. He apologizes to our hero for failing to complete such a simple task. And at that moment, the blade hits him. But something happens. He disappears, leaving the adventurer completely surprised. Then he looks to the side and notices the presence of another person. He sees the guy over there, but shudders when he realizes that he didn't even sense the presence of this other adventurer. Now that the defeated man is lying on the ground, our main character wonders how he managed to defeat him. He was considered a living shield, but his friend ends up saying that he is only alive because our protagonist's friend showed up and saved his life. The adventurer wonders who this guy is who just showed up. Besides, he doesn't care because his goal was to destroy the guy below. But now our main character interrupts him and asks him to shut up because now is not the time for him to talk. The killer is simply shocked by such disrespect towards him. At this time, the main character asks Ponti to take Zyfan to a safer place. And so he does. He picks up Zyfan and carries him to a safer place. But at that moment, as he tries to leave, we notice an adventurer appearing behind him, trying to strike him. But in this game, our main character is faster. Our protagonist manages to strike him right in the face, sending him spinning backwards. He continues to say that it is still not his turn to speak. He ends up getting pinned against the wall. After being pinned against the wall, he gets up, spitting blood. His face looks like it has been beaten by 100 rabid baboons. Now he looks ahead and realizes that this guy in front of him is different from anyone he has seen wandering the dungeons. They were all weak, but this one always appeared in his statistics and always looked weak. He didn't pay much attention to it, but now everything was different. So he needed to take this fight a little more seriously. At that moment, our main character decides to take a few steps and is already behind the bastard. The killer was shocked. It was very fast, more like teleportation. But as soon as the protagonist did this, he ended up smiling and saying that the bastard had just fallen into his trap. 2 invisible daggers are aimed at the feet of our protagonist, the hero, to try to catch him. And a bunch of auras were directed at him from above. Of course, it hit him, so our main character ended up cutting him a little, but it wasn't time to defeat him yet. He liked our guy, but he was a bit of an unknown quantity. But how could an unknown guy compete with him? At that moment, thanks to our protagonist's aura, that invisible sword breaks, leaving him in complete silence and disbelief. He even notices that the light emanating from our protagonist was the light of a holy night. But in the end, the ability he used was quite disappointing. Yu thought it would be stronger than he imagined. Being a level 4 adventurer, he was surprised to see that it was too weak. He even prepared a little beforehand, at least to make the fight fair. But in the end, he didn't even have to prepare that much. So he decided to retreat, leaving the guy completely annoyed. At that moment, trembling with rage, he lifts him high, and then shouted to activate his strongest abilities. When he says this, we see several cuts going in different directions, slicing through everything around him. But these cuts are clearly aimed at our protagonist. However, before being caught by these cuts, he uses that sacred light again. At that moment, dust rises, due to the many cuts that have occurred there. After the dust settles, we see that our protagonist is fine. He then comments that now he too can leave in peace. Another guy appears behind him. He realizes that even that ability was not enough to break through his defense. So now he has a new method. Now he will attack head on. But this frontal attack was useless for him. At that moment, the dagger is aimed at our protagonist, but now it seems to have grazed him. After that, he comments that this sword was made by some devils, which ultimately gave him a greater advantage over our protagonist. But after finishing his statement, Yan wonders if he was serious about what he just said. He realizes that the dagger did not remain in our protagonist. Something invisible held his sword, but in the end, the strongest sword he had broke. But at that moment, our main character hits him in the face with his knee, causing him to fly upward, so high that he ends up breaking through the wall above. Now he can't believe it. He had 2 shields. How could he have known? Now at the top, we see our protagonist appear. He was going to finish off this adventurer, but the latter asks him to stop, because if he goes any further, the Zong family, the very one that ended the life of our protagonist's friend, will come after him. He doesn't care, and he ends up asking them to come after him. He activates his fire. With this activated fire, he ends up hitting the adventurer with full force, throwing him into the mountain. There is an explosion, and in the end, we see only his body on the ground, defeated. He could do nothing more. In the background, we see our protagonist's friends and his new summoned creature watching all this. The demon servant said that the master had essentially undergone a giant evolution, rendering his opponent's level completely useless. On the other hand, our protagonist's friend agrees that the improvement he achieved was quite incredible. Our protagonist's level ultimately surpassed that of his opponent. Now looking at him, he realizes that staying close to our protagonist was interesting. The evolution was intriguing, making him very promising and leading one to think that perhaps the main character will be able to bring the demon clan back to the real world. Now that he has approached his opponent, he realizes that he has gained a lot of experience. After all, you get more by killing an adventurer than by killing a monster. But at that moment, he ends up thinking that in his past life, he never even had the courage to do so. Moreover, the guild he belonged to forbade him from doing such things. So, in the end, after calculating all this, he realizes that gaining experience by killing adventurers was easier than killing monsters. But in the dungeon of the third level, we see a scene taking place inside the dungeon. We find several adventurers, and some people in hoods. A few minutes later, another 6th level adventurer appears and kills him. And in the end, he gets his 50 experience points. It was Zhu Yin, and looking at his blade, he thought about how boring it was that they died so quickly. And then they address him sarcastically, seeing how hard his bro's working. Yin immediately parries his brother's sarcasm in a crimson suit by saying that he himself never shows up here. He's not interested in leveling up. Shutong did not answer his question, but instead wanted to know why he was wearing hoods. Was he afraid that their faces would haunt his dreams? But the madman with the broken thread reveals the reason, and the reason was not a good one. It helps him focus on their eyes, because only then can he see how the light of life completely disappears from their eyes. This cheers him up. But at that moment, he wonders why he came here, to the dungeon. He didn't just come to the dungeon to watch the crazy things this guy was doing. He reveals that he came here only to help him level up. He was looking for adventurers because for him, adventurers gave him more experience and raised his levels faster. Then the man shows a photo of the guy, saying that this guy was at level 3. But once he somehow manages to catch him and possibly kill him in the end, he will be able to gain a lot of experience from him. But while he was thinking about what to do to track him down, sending a letter to another place, we see our protagonist sitting while his friend trains. But at the same time, he comments that he just healed him. So it wasn't very good to continue training at the same time, but the other guy said he was fine. Only now he wonders why the protagonist was not eager to enter the dungeon to level up. Then he replies that yes, he was eager, and he couldn't wait to find out what level he would reach. Elsewhere, he tells his friend that the servants are farming experience for him. The scene then switches to a completely unfamiliar place, or rather, a dungeon. In this dungeon, we see our hero's summoned creature. He was on the 5th level, summoning lower-level summoned creatures to deal with the monsters. After they finished, he looked at them with contempt. They commented that everyone here belongs to one master, and that the master ordered everyone here to fight and finish off the monsters as quickly as possible. However, he just sat there and gave them orders. Then one of the shadows pointed a sword at him and demanded that he get up and do something. He replied that he was the first to be summoned, so he had the right to command the weaker ones. Looking down, they notice one of the recruits chasing a cricket. But instead of continuing the argument, the stronger shadow ends up making a bet, or rather wanting to make a bet with everyone to see who can earn the most experience. The demon rushes forward. At that moment, as he says this, he jumps onto a giant horde of monsters that had appeared. They were all level 5, but with a single wave of his hand, he manages to completely destroy this wave of monsters. All the experience goes to our hero. Meanwhile, we see that only ashes remain of those monsters. With such a feat, he will undoubtedly earn some bonuses from our protagonist. However, while he was thinking about what to do to earn bonuses, one of the monsters suddenly appears behind him. But it doesn't get much screen time, as with one blow, another demon has already cut the bastard in half. After that, he scolds the guy. But at that moment, another monster tries its luck. However, with a single movement of his hand, he manages to split this monster in 2, and yet there were still more behind him. So, he begins to perform another technique, sending several blows toward that group of monsters, cutting each of them in half. But that's not the end of it, as there were still many monsters around. One of the defiled guardians of light from the past rushes forward, and ends up thanking the others for gathering all the monsters in one line. The other shadows tell him to wait because there are still things to do, but it's useless. Then he uses his sacred sword, which grows significantly in size and a giant tail emerges from it. Next, we see a blow that cuts through all the monsters in front of him, causing endless experience to accumulate on our protagonist's account. But now the protagonist finds himself in a different place. Meanwhile, he comments that his summoned creatures were really eager to gain experience. However, someone calls out to Yoon Kina. At that moment, when he sees the group, he notices that Dover the dwarf is now among them. He approaches his friend and asks why he brought the dwarf, considering that dwarves would easily trade the lives of everyone on the team for ore. The dwarf, of course, heard all this and ended up dropping his axe on the ground, saying no way. He then comments that everything they said was a lie, as there are no more gnomes like that. But he was different. He was a more distinctive gnome, preferring to be an ally rather than a hindrance. He begins to tease the gnome, annoying him. His friend defends the gnome, saying that he is reliable. He turns to his friend and comments that there should have been 5 adventurers, but his friend just laughs and tells him to take a look up with at least one eye. It was a giantess, the 4th member of the party. She was an adventurer from the tribe of giants, and the dwarf was shocked by the difference in height. But as soon as the adventurer saw her, she quickly hid behind a rock. As soon as she hid, Sue explained that despite her size, this girl, Erin, was quite shy. Our main character points to his friend and comments that one more adventurer is missing. When he mentions this last adventurer, he immediately appears and apologizes for being late. A level 4 adventurer arrived, another person with his own story. It was that same crazy sadistic hunter from the dungeon, Zhu Yin, who apologized again for being late. He thought to himself that he didn't appear in public very often and tried to hide his status, so they should believe that he was a newcomer. Now our protagonist's friend introduced him to the group, saying that this was a guy who was looking for a team and begged to be included in the hero's team. Despite his level, he was good in battle. Until then, our main character looked at him and realized that this guy was never, even in his wildest dreams, a level 4 adventurer. He had seen this guy somewhere before and senses something wrong but ignores it. So they start moving towards the portal in front of them, which was level 6. But here we go back 2 hours, where we see our protagonist group forming. While Sue was looking for a team, our hero was looking for a dungeon. He found one, but inside was a boss that was stronger than him. But it was worth entering this dungeon, so at this moment our hero chooses it, and his friend goes to look for their group. They open the door, and now they are inside the dungeon. Everything is dark and filled with strange purple smoke. We see this level 4 adventurer commenting that he was very scared, it was terrible. Then that girl from the giant tribe appears and offers him a lollipop, as this usually calms people down in such situations. It's like magic. He was a little scared by the size of the lollipop because it could kill someone, but he ignored it. Our hero turns to his group and unexpectedly asks where the dwarf is. Of course, no one knows. At that moment, the dwarf warrior noticed something amazing. He admired the giant blue crystals and muttered in amazement. The dwarf exclaimed about the number of magical blue crystals, imagining how rich he would become, and began to break them to extract and take them with him. He expressed his surprise at the huge number of crystals. He noticed that the crystals were everywhere and thought he might find rare crystals deeper in the cave. He whispered quietly, looking at the horizon, noticing something glowing. The dwarf saw a bright yellow gold stone. He shouted that he had finally found what was probably the most valuable and expensive stone, and jumped towards it, laughing and rejoicing that now it all belonged to him. He struck it sharply, trying to destroy the yellow crystals. But suddenly they disappeared, and his pickaxe simply entered the stone. The dwarf broke the stone, and energy flowed out of it, leaving him frightened as he exclaimed what was happening. Returning to the group of adventurers, the protagonist asked if anyone else had entered the cave, while the group commented on the high probability of finding something important. Suddenly, the entire cave began to shake, and the protagonist's friend asked in disbelief what was happening. He pointed, asking if it was a demon, or was it their dwarf companion after all? But the dwarf warrior was already running blue and used up all his last breath to shout at them to move faster. He ran and shouted while several golems chased him. The guy in orange, smiling and waving his sword, noticed the dwarf's fear of the stone monsters. The dwarf shuddered when a giant creature appeared behind him. The giant statue of tears of hatred pursued the dwarf, a green aura circulating around it, while the dwarf screamed in terror, desperately running away. The protagonist's friend was frightened. The man with the mustache considered taking down several members of the team, but an unexpected and more threatening opponent arrived. He turned and ran away, saying that it was better to lose experience than his life, while the other two watched. They were surprised by the green glow coming from the cave. A massive green explosion filled the surrounding area. He ran away, escaping from the collapsing cave. The statue moved towards the protagonist's friend, who screamed in fear and ran desperately. It roared, its eyes glowing as it prepared to attack with green energy. It spat out a bright green liquid, roaring in rage. The green slime was about to hit the group. The protagonist ran towards the statue. The friend in orange, running, asked what was going on, while the protagonist stood in front of the statue, shouting that it was impossible to dodge such a massive attack. The protagonist activated his new energy and told everyone to gather around him. He created an energy shield in the shape of a cross. The slime hit the protagonist's shield, but it didn't break through. It began to melt the shield. He screamed as the green energy hit him, reaching his arm and gradually corroding it. The green slime hit him, almost reaching the protagonist's friend. The protagonist thought that his 5th-level shield would not withstand the attacks of the 7th-level boss, and that it only protected him, meaning his friends would be hit. He created dark and bloody energy with his hand. He threw the energy at the ground, and a red and black stream spread out. All around the protective sphere, both Sue and the dwarf were shocked by this. The warrior roared while the boy watched in fear. The protagonist summoned a level 5 beast, which also roared with fury. The dwarf wondered if he was hallucinating about the adventurer summoning demons, thinking that such magic was absurd and even the best adventurers couldn't do it. The protagonist shouted, asking everyone to hold on because he would get them out of there, showing his leadership at that moment. The creature began to dig into the ground, opening a path for their escape, showing the power of the summoned creature. The protagonist tried to convince his friend to enter the hole, demonstrating his concern for everyone's safety. He assured his friend that everything would be okay, urging him to leave, showing his determination and leadership. The red-haired girl came down, mentioning that they would go first and asking if the MC would follow them, showing her concern. The blonde stated that he couldn't go because if he removed the shield, the boss's fluid would flood the tunnel, revealing the danger they were in. The dwarf asked how they would leave the boss to die, but Sue had already assured them that Yan would soon gain a new level, which surprised the dwarf. The scene changed to Bastard Jew watching as the statue walked towards the pool of slime, showing that the creature had a purpose. He thought he had run fast, and if he hadn't, he would have been reduced to a bloody mess, showing that the escape was crucial. The statue looked at the green glow of the slime, showing interest in what was happening there. The statue, with glowing eyes and green tears, muttered something inaudible, expressing intense suffering that everyone could feel. The protagonist used his powers to push back the green slime, protecting everyone, showing his strength and leadership. The mustachioed man commented that the boy had absorbed the boss's abilities, expressing his surprise. He noted that the 7th level easily dominated the 5th, and wondered how this happened, which defied logic. The protagonist, with the red-hot energy in his hand, was silent, showing that he was focused on the battle. He was already level 6. The man watched the monster and wondered how the boy had evolved, showing everyone surprise at the protagonist's strength. He was surprised at how he had leveled up without fighting a single monster, showing his bewilderment at what was happening and expressing everyone's confusion. 5 minutes earlier, a grinning monster with glowing yellow eyes was shown, revealing the plan. A monstrous hand emerged from the rocks, demonstrating the creature's strength. The monster stated that he had destroyed almost all the monsters and asked if the boss would evolve, revealing the plan in action. The monster commented that something good was coming to an end, indicating that the battle was nearing its end. The beetle had already been summoned. The other monster growled, asking the other not to underestimate him, showing that he too had great power. He shouted that he wanted to join the battle and sensed the master to call him, revealing his ambitions. The protagonist, with a tense face, prepared for the imminent attack, demonstrating that he was ready for battle. The giant statue's leg crashed to the ground, causing great destruction and showing the creature's power. She hit the ground and the protagonist dodged. A large explosion of energy occurred, demonstrating the power of the statue. The protagonist thought that against such large creatures, attacking from the bottom would be more effective, showing his battle strategy. The protagonist attacked with a golden sword, cutting through his opponent, demonstrating his fighting prowess. She began to fall, screaming, and the impact caused a deafening roar. The force of the battle was incredible. She fell and a large explosion occurred, showing the result of the attack. The protagonist stood, holding his sword ready for another clash. He ran with his sword in hand, its blade glowing with energy, showing that he would not give up. He leapt into attack, slashing with his sword charged with electricity, showing his strength and agility. He threw a punch, and the statue tried to block it with its hand to prevent the attack. The protagonist was captured by the statue, putting him in a dangerous position. The battle had reached a critical point, but something was wrong. The statue cracked and screamed in pain, holding the protagonist, showing the power of his light strike. He broke free from her hand, breaking everything with a circular attack, showing his power and strength. He delivered a powerful blow to the statue's head, catching it right between the eyes. He thrust the sword deep into the statue's head with a blow, and lightning rained down from the crack, showing how powerful the energy released at that moment was. An intense yellow lightning pierced through everything, surrounded by debris and flames, showing the result of a powerful attack. Everything was destroyed and everyone watched the chaos, showing the outcome of the entire battle. The dwarf was surprised to mention that a level 6 adventurer had defeated a level 7 rare boss, while the other smiled, showing that everyone was impressed by the outcome of the battle. The blonde commented that for him, it was all drama and triviality, while the main character stated that something was wrong, revealing his concerns. He mentioned that despite being almost out of energy, it was a rare boss and the fight was unbalanced, showing that victory was not easy. Green slime burst out of the ground, and he expressed his surprise, showing that the battle was far from over. She approached the protagonist. The danger was imminent. She began to grow, and there was a bright green explosion, turning the fight into something even more dangerous. A bright yellow sphere emitted green lightning above the protagonist, putting his life at risk. A massive explosion occurred, turning the battlefield into chaos. The explosion was visible from afar, demonstrating the scale of the battle. The protagonist jumped, escaping from the green slime that was pursuing him, fighting for survival. The battle was far from over. He thought that his magic was running low and that his armor wouldn't last long, showing the danger he was in. He watched the green magic, trying to understand what was happening. The warrior asked what the fog was, and the blonde replied that it was steam from a superheated toxic liquid, showing the danger of the situation. The blonde took a deep breath with a serious expression on his face, showing his concern for what was about to happen. He mentioned that the boss was in a second phase and that the fight had gotten worse, wondering why he hadn't summoned his minions, revealing that the fight wasn't over. And now there was only a landscape of dark sky and rocky mountains with vegetation. The protagonist thought about delaying the fight and wondered about the hidden enemy, showing that he had no intention of attacking without a plan. He heard a sound, something moving, something that caught his attention on his way. His eyes widened, showing surprise at what he saw or heard. Something unexpected had happened. He dodged the attack, a red whirlwind, showing off his agility and reflexes at that moment. A ball of energy flew past, leaving a trail behind it, demonstrating its speed and strength, showing the power of this magic. He caused an explosion. A glowing red symbol appeared from the detonation, a powerful and impressive attack. The protagonist watched as a hand emerged from the darkness, something frightening and mysterious. He activated his shield to protect himself from the attack, preparing for what lay ahead. The protagonist thought the boss had figured out his armor, but he underestimated him, showing that he still had tricks up his sleeve. He dodged the blow, showing his agility and reflexes, showing the strength he possessed in battle. Her eyes widened, showing surprise at her opponent's speed. The power of this attack was shocking. She only saw a golden blade approaching her. A silent scream escaped her lips, revealing her fear at the moment of death. Her head was severed, marking the end of the battle for her at that moment. The battle was over. The warrior stated that the fog was clearing, showing his relief at the clash. It was the end of another battle. The protagonist's friend waved and called his name, showing his joy at seeing him safe and sound. The protagonist asked about the others, and the blonde explained that he would collect the ore shards, and the girl went with him, showing that everyone had a role to play in this journey. In the cave, the gnome was collecting crystals, showing his greed and obsession with wealth, something that motivated his actions. He held up a blue crystal, shouting that no magic crystal could escape his control, but someone's foot crushed the shining stone, and he screamed, trying to reach it, showing his despair and loss. Everything he wanted was gone. It becomes clear that a giantess has come, and the grandfather asks, why did she do this? And then she starts talking, asking if he hadn't been paying attention to his surroundings. These aren't crystals at all. Shuddering at the giantess's words, he turns to the side with an expression of animal fear on his face. He notices that there were several skeletons of some kind of creatures below. The dwarf was simply shocked and turned to the goddess of the dwarves. He took out everything that was in his bag. Now we understand that the dwarf fell under the spell of the king of the dwarves. He fell to his knees and looked at all these bones, realizing that he had fallen under the spell as soon as he entered the dungeon. Now he asks the giantess if she too has accidentally fallen under the spell. She says no, because for some reason the gas was on the bottom layer, and the gnome was completely in that layer. Meanwhile, we watch as our protagonist's friend says that he would return to call the rest of the group, but when he received no answer, he extended his hand to Yunkin. Suddenly a sudden cut appears, slicing through his arm, and now his wrist is separate from the rest of his hand, flying somewhere above. He flinches and screams, but now looking to the side, he realizes that Yunkin has fallen. Just a moment ago, he was standing right in front of him. What happened? But also, who cut his hand? The boss wasn't dead until he realized something. It wasn't quite what happened. The boss appears next to him, hitting him, and he just falls to the ground. And only after all this, we see how the boss appears right next to the main character after defeating the adventurer. She starts looking at her hand and wonders at the cuts she made. However, she was interested in adventurers, and this adventurer who defeated her just a moment ago. She wanted to take his body to study it a little, so he rushes at Yunkin to hit him, but before he can do so, the corrupted hammer moves towards her. She notices it, and he raises his hand to protect himself from the blow. But even this was not enough, which is why she is thrown aside. After this, the corrupted hammer moves towards the dwarf's hand. The gnome looks at the face of our hero's friend who was lying there. And perhaps, now the dwarf understands that it was not only he who was poisoned, but the entire group. Perhaps it was all part of a hallucination caused by that poison. But it was not too late, they could still win. However, looking at that gnome, she wonders why the gnome was here. The gnome was supposed to be sleeping and collecting those valuable crystals, but then the boss also wonders where that giantess is. She was not in the dwarf's group until suddenly he notices an arrow flying quickly in his direction. However, she notices it just in time and manages to dodge. If not, the damage would have been serious, since just one arrow was capable of splitting that tree in half. And when an arrow flies right next to her, she turns to the forest, where she finds the girl and realizes that she is good at hiding. Then a dwarf appears from behind with a hammer, intending to hit her, but she quickly turns and defends herself. Now that she is closer, she realizes that this dwarf is 2 levels below her, and she wonders why such a weak creature like him is trying to fight her. But since he was getting closer, that was good. It meant she didn't have to go to the dwarf herself to grab him, so she activates that slime again and moves towards the gnome. The gnome doesn't have time to dodge and gets hit by her. Suddenly another arrow flies in her direction. She notices it and turns to try to block the arrow. But then a gnome appears out of nowhere and grabs her by the leg. She is surprised because one attack should have been enough, especially seeing that the dwarf was still alive. But now it was too late to dodge the arrow. And the arrow eventually hits her, causing thick smoke. Lying on the ground, the dwarf says that he has a certain special ability that helped him stay alive. It was stone skin. Although this ability is quite weak, he still managed to last for quite a long time. At this point, the smoke clears, and we see that the boss managed to catch that arrow. But now the arrow has melted somewhat from her poison. But we understand that even this was not enough to scratch her. With her mouth open after all this, the giantess even comments that their levels were too low. Their strength was nothing. The gnome cried out in despair because of this, and the monster had already turned to him. She then attacks the gnome again with poison, damaging him. The hidden giantess eventually screams his name, and because of this, the boss finds her. After that, she simply points her finger in the direction of the giantess, and a poisonous arrow rushes towards her. Hitting the mark, the giantess is finished. Now everyone falls to the ground, and she could finally continue her research, until he realizes that 2 people are missing here. One in a red shirt and the other one who was lying there, fallen. And to understand where they went, we saw a trail of blood. As she walked along it, further ahead we saw that our protagonist's friend was carrying it. Somewhere safer. He couldn't die here. But from behind we saw the guy stretch his hand in their direction and then launched that poisonous volley again. The thing moved towards them. Our protagonist's friend saw only as she approaches, but in the end they were all caught. It was a pity to do this, because among these two there was a particularly special adventurer, and she wanted to study him further. It was a pity. However, from the depths of this poison, a persistent hand emerged. It was Yun Jing, and he had now reached level 7. After waiting for a while, he finally understood how his abilities worked. But the boss was surprised. How did he manage to level up? To understand this, we need to look into his shadows. At that moment, the shadow managed to defeat a very powerful boss. And then the strongest shadow commented that with the victory over this boss, it was very likely that its master would now be at level 7. Returning to the protagonist, he commented that, from the very beginning, everything they experienced was almost like a dream created by that boss's poison. But now it was all over. At that moment, he extended his hand. But now he realized that the poisonous gas could be ignited. When he lit this flame, he just didn't see it before because his level was too low. At that moment, she used that poison gas again, directing it at him, and completely enveloped in green liquid. She even celebrated, believing that this was his end. Until I realized that the main character managed to dodge the first attack. To counter this, she released more poison, but he dodged everything. However, now everything had changed. Our protagonist was closer to her than ever. Seeing this, she thought she had a chance, but it was useless. With one blow, our protagonist managed to cut her. But even after cutting her, he noticed that she could regenerate. And I was very surprised. While regenerating, she became furious because he left a cut on her. Now she will not be able to wear a bikini anymore. So she used all her power, and our protagonist did the same. Their forces clashed with each other. When they clashed, she commented that he had a good memory. When her power and our protagonist's power met, it turned into a poisonous mist. After all, it was only a matter of time before our protagonist lost his armor. It wouldn't last forever. He even wondered if it was really happening. Then he reached into her mist and lit a more powerful fire again. She was amazed by this power, but soon the flames engulfed her. After everything, we saw him standing there, calmly watching everything that was happening. He realized that he had gained 400 levels, but even that was not enough to kill her. But suddenly something surprised him. In another place, we saw her rising among the rocks. She used her poison again to deceive that adventurer. Unfortunately, she had to do this because it was very likely that when she returned, she would want revenge. She couldn't kill him, but she could destroy the weaker adventurers. However, while thinking about this, she noticed a blade approaching. To avoid the blow, she lowered her horns. However, they were cleanly cut off. But at the moment when she dodged, we saw a hand appear behind her. Now that she had appeared, she asked herself where this monster had come from. And is he a servant of that bastard? But there was no time for questions and answers, because the shadow of our hero threw a flame at her, sending her flying. But even that wasn't enough to defeat her. It was then that the Holy Knight appeared. With his sword, he struck a blow that finally managed to cut her in half again. But this was still not enough, and then the final call comes. That shield he took earlier, and that absorbs that girl. But that summoning he made had to try to swallow this girl, which they didn't want, since it was very likely that the main character wanted to summon her as a shadow for himself. But even after all this, he realizes that she is still alive, and the demons notice their master. Only now she had a choice, to become his ally or die herself. She ultimately refuses. She was one of those who belonged to the strongest demon clan, and she would not stoop to being a human's ally. To do this, he takes his sword and ultimately asks her to go to another world. She even said that dying was actually better than being an ally of these people. Then the blow comes, but nothing happens until she realizes that all the wounds have healed. When she looks up, she sees those allies of our hero looking at her with a smile. Then someone comments that she is still alive. When she stands up and looks around, she sees our protagonist, with a slightly more imposing presence than before. Thus, on her knees, she ends up calling our protagonist her master. After all this, we see our protagonist gain many things, giving weapons to the shadows, including this one, who were now able to feel much stronger at this point. While the shadows were celebrating, we could see someone appear in the background calling out to Yun Kin, and in the background we could see that it was that giantess. She comments that she gave them all the healing potions, but nothing helped. Their wounds were too deep. He then approaches them to heal them, but his shadow appears saying that there is no need, because they will do it themselves, and he reaches out to them, now healing them. We then see our protagonists thinking that they were lucky to be in this dungeon. They were able to significantly increase the level, also raising it from the lowest level to a higher one. But he doesn't understand why the golems that were chasing the dwarf turned into these creatures after the guy's defeat. At this point, his new shadow appears, commenting that she knows of some very important chests in this dungeon that he could take, and thus she could guide our hero. As soon as she says this, we see that our hero's other shadow is furious at her for trying to steal his position as the strongest shadow. While the two shadows argue, we see below the hero's friend, who was lying on the ground. But even after his healing, he realized that his hand had not returned to its natural state. However, in any case, the main character sees that everything is fine with them. He then turns to the giantess and asks her to go to the city and get them, as there they could find a high-class priest, and with that priest he could restore his hand. But to leave this dungeon completely safely, they needed a strong shadow to guide them. So he asks this shadow to guide him, and he agrees. As they walk away with the shadow, we watch as our protagonist heads in the other direction. From the very beginning of this battle, he knows that he is still missing a level 4 adventurer. This guy must be up to something. But if he tries to do something against our hero's team, he doesn't even worry because he has a level 7 shadow with him. So he has nothing to worry about. Then the scene switches to them, where we see the giantess talking to that shadow. But the shadow wonders why she is covering the dwarf with a cloth. Then she replies that his armor was completely burned. So in short, the dwarf has no clothes left. Having said such things, the summoned creature begins to comment that there was no point in such things. But as he walks, he feels trapped. Seeing that he was about to be caught, he jumps up to avoid being captured. But even after the jump, we see how the chain grabs his hands, and it pulls you towards the ground. In order to avoid being pulled down, he eventually cuts this chain, but now other chains are clearly emerging, which are coming from different directions. These chains bind the shadow of our protagonist. Meanwhile, the giantess asks him to wait, as she will help him. But he tells her to stay put because she needs to focus on other things. Someone was hunting her. He could free himself, and from behind we watch how that adventurer smiles. But that shadow of our protagonist manages to free himself with one movement, releasing a bunch of different energy, and now he was eager to help the girl. So, knowing that this shadow is strong, we see him activate another of his abilities to finally capture the shadow. But while all this is happening, the scene switches to another place, where we see our hero opening a chest. Opening this chest, he takes a rare weapon. Having received this rare weapon, we watch as the shadow praises our protagonist. However, while praising him, he feels the presence of something strange, which upsets Natalie, our hero's shadow, who wonders what's wrong with the chest. The chest does not satisfy her. She comments that if he goes further, he will find even better chests. However, he now notices that there was nothing wrong with the chest she gave him, but rather other things were happening. Friends are in trouble, and so he asks her to look for some chests. She understands, and at that moment, our hero disappears. The scene then returns to the previous location, where we see the giantess falling to the ground. Meanwhile, ahead we see that level 4 hunter. He stood in front of our hero's shadow, which was locked in some sticky mud or something. He tried to escape, but the man told him not to try. It was an ability that trapped everything inside, and once caught, no one could get out. But there was no need to worry because he would get him out of this sticky thing. It turns out that it was Ju Yin, a level 7 fighter. Meanwhile, we watch as the shadow screams at him not to do something so stupid. If he does, he will suffer the consequences, but not at his hands, but at the hands of his boss. But he didn't care, his power was too great. At this point, the shadow, frightened, asks how he managed to level up so much. He then reveals that before joining this group, he was level 6, but after the boss died, he eventually leveled up to level 7. Then they ask what happened. While our hero was fighting the boss, he dealt with those weak golems, and this, in fact, allowed him to level up significantly. After all this is revealed, he then asks his master if he heard everything. However, the now level 7 adventurer tells him not to start crying so soon. He then raises his sword and strikes in his direction, but before the sword can reach him, another sword appears, stopping the attack from hitting our protagonist's shadow. Then we see our hero appear there out of nowhere. Standing on his sword, he managed to stay on his feet. Now that he had heard the whole story, he no longer had to hold back. The S-rank fighter stands there with his mouth open, unable to believe how the servant was able to summon the master right in front of him. While he was in shock, a shadow appeared behind him, and almost grabbed him. But then he uses his ability, causing the stone to rise and immobilize the shadow. After this, he goes to our hero to try to strike. However, now our hero manages to dodge and lands on the ground far from the sadist. But this is not enough, as it activates another trap, which imprisons our protagonist in some kind of cage. Even though he was strong and fast, he wouldn't escape this time. Now the kidnapper squeezes his hand, sealing our hero locked in this cage inside. The sadist wonders if it really worked, since the experience for killing hasn't come yet, until suddenly he feels a huge pressure. At this moment, the cell explodes, and he manages to avoid everything. The first demon servant arrived and grabbed the main character, asking if the madman had died, but the guy said that he didn't get any experience, which means that this time he only killed his clone. Meanwhile, elsewhere, we see him building another trap to keep everything under control. He then comments that escaping won't be easy now, as he has also set up many traps at the exit. But while he is talking about this, a monster appears next to him. He tells the monster to shut up, but after he growls, we see our protagonist's shadow discover him. Now that she has found him, she throws a powerful fire in his direction. However, the sadist can no longer stay there, so he starts running towards the portal. While running, he realizes that his summon is much stronger than the others, but it is also difficult to deal with. It flies. He'll have to use some spikes to deal with his shadow. Suddenly, he looks up and notices something strange appearing. What appeared was practically a sword that almost hit him, but he ended up dodging it. The only thing that was cut were a few clones, and the usual sharp thorns of stones. In the end, all the traps he set worked, and now it will be incredibly difficult, almost impossible, to restore them all. The sadist was in shock. Now he had no chance of winning. He had to run. As he speaks about this, someone appears behind him and tells him that he will not be able to escape. Then we see that it was the girl boss of this floor. After this, she throws poison in his direction, literally wiping this bastard off the face of the earth. After all this, we see our heroes commenting that their illusions were rather unfair, but now in the end, it worked perfectly. But she asked to let her finish him. And our protagonist even comments that now is the time to deal with him. A few minutes later, we see that Zhu Yin has turned into a shadow. He can't believe what's happening. Looking forward, he sees other servants. Another shadow comments, "Welcome to the group." But now our hero has a task for his shadows. The Shadow Knight is chosen to go to the nearest hospital, turn into a human, and guard the giantess along with the dwarf. The one in front of him must go into the dungeons and get all the experience they can gather. Regardless of the situation, they should not waste time on chess, because resources are not the most important thing now. And now the main character turned to the new recruit. Juin stood tensely, waiting to see what he would be ordered to do. Now he will return to his guild and return to his normal life. He will also report to his guild that he has completed his mission to kill our protagonist, but this is part of his plan. There he will collect special information to pass on to our protagonist. Having said this, he agrees and disappears. Now the main character stood in front of the portal and joyfully shouted, "Everyone get to work!" The scene switches to another location where we see several people wondering why the tanks and adventurers can't stop the one and only boss. Below, we are introduced to this boss. It was a wild boss of the 10th level. The boss ran towards the group as they ran, constantly begging for a shield or for someone stronger to appear. If this continued, the entire group would be wiped out by this one boss. While running, the mage comments that a high-level archer is already on his way. Meanwhile, nearby, on top of some rocks, we see a figure. An archer who is better known as the president of a certain guild and a 10th level warrior, Zhu Xie. Although he hasn't appeared yet, we see a tank moving forward. It was a 9th level warrior, Zeke. He just asked to be healed. If he is healed, he can hold off this monster for a few minutes. As soon as he says this, we see an adventurer appear from behind. She is better known as a healer. She uses her healing ability on the tank, restoring his strength. He then activates his shield ability. Before, he was injured and it took him a whole minute to hold it down, but this time, it might only take him 10 seconds to hold down such a monster. However, at that very moment, a monster appears. With one blow, it hits the shield, instantly shattering it. But that wasn't all. The impact of the tank threw it back with great force. A moment later, he crashes into the mountain wall, completely splitting it. His group watches in shock. One blow was enough to break through the defense of this incredible tank. Such was the power of the monster. The shadow of the monster then appears near the characters in the background, who turn around, trembling in fear. They now realize that this is the end for them. But suddenly this elephant boss stops in shock, until one of them points up and exclaims that it's the guild president. Looking up, we see Yushi standing there, looking down. At this moment, the guards and adventurers notice his presence. They are filled with joy. While they are celebrating, the adventurer suddenly jumps from this height. Its speed is extremely high. As he falls towards the boss, we see the boss preparing to strike, intending to finish him off in one fell swoop. However, at the same time, the adventurer is also preparing his attack. He prepares himself and throws a punch, and the boss does the same. The two punches meet in midair. The one who is stronger will be the winner. The adventurer then strikes with a more powerful blow. His blow is so powerful that it pushes the boss's arm back a little. But that alone is not enough. Defeating the boss would be easy. With one powerful fist, he crushes the boss. Not only does he defeat him, but he also humiliates him. After all this, we see the boss being pushed deeper and deeper into the ground. The adventurer's attack was stunningly powerful. The girl wonders if the shock wave will hit them, but the bald guy was sure that they wouldn't get caught. After all, they were far away. Until a few seconds later, they realize what really got them. The girl screams. And while he is, so to speak, trampled into the ground, they, in order to avoid the same fate, begin to run. But while they are running, we see that everything was in vain. The girl and another adventurer were caught by his ability, and everyone around was sent to another place. To heaven, or maybe to hell. After all this destruction, we see, like something flies to another place. But this thing suddenly stops right in front of the adventurer. The adventurer looks at him and is surprised, seeing that the president has become, let's say, more arrogant and crazy than before. However, for him it was not so surprising anymore. He greets him, but the president tells him to step aside. Otherwise, the same thing will happen to him. But he ignores the warning and begins to tell the story. The president, however, asks him to stop this nonsense and asks why he is here. The adventurer then vaguely mentions that he has good news. He has finally completed his revenge and has now come to tell him about it. Then he turns slightly and tells him not to talk to him about such things. After all this, he was about to leave. But before he did so, he asked if the president would, by chance, be present at a private meeting with those angels later in the day. Hearing the word angels, the president's gaze changes. Something comes out of his eyes and moves towards the adventurer. He falls under its influence and falls to his knees. After this, the president warns him not to talk about things that he shouldn't. Otherwise, dangerous situations will arise for him. After these words, the adventurer apologizes and the president leaves. Left alone, the adventurer feels a little depressed. Even after reaching the 7th level, he was still broken by the enormous pressure of this so-called president. But that was a question for later. Unfortunately, he was far from being at the level of the president, but he hoped that his master would at least allow him to train under him. Meanwhile, in the Temple of Angels, we see the president walking around. He arrives at a certain location and kneels, declaring that the supposed surviving adventurer has been eliminated. Now that he had rather triumphantly settled this issue, he asked the boss behind the scenes to hand him the key to some epic portals. The boss laughs in his face, saying that he just sorted out a trivial matter and demands such a high reward for it. This was an insult to him. After that, he realizes that the young angel has a sense of humor. However, for adventurers above level 10, it takes a lot of effort to reach higher ranks, because they get too little experience from lower rank enemies. If they only encountered monsters or adventurers of the same level, they would not be able to level up much. Not to mention that the strongest bosses were rare, and they could do little. Finding such monsters was rare. However, he asked that they at least hand over the key, as he has done a lot of dirty work for these angels for them over the years. One of the guards hears this and gets irritated. Then he asks the president if he is afraid of losing his life for such words. In one motion, he draws his sword and attacks, with the intention of destroying him. But then someone outside the door orders him to stop. He complies, but not before his blow half cuts through the spikes on the president's head. At this point, the figure behind the door begins to say that if he had not chosen him in that dungeon, he and his tribe members would have been destroyed. In the end, it was a blessing for him to just take control of the small guild that existed. By being there and taking care of it, he then gives thanks for it. After saying something like that, something falls next to him, catching his attention. He turns around and, having done so, is surprised by the rift left by one movement of that adventurer, or one of the angelic guards. In the background, we see that the cut was not just a cut, With one swing of his sword, he almost split the mountain in half. Realizing the power of these guards, he realizes that these simple guards here are much stronger than him, as just one of them could kill him at any moment with one move. He then goes on to ask if they would by any chance give him the key. As his concern about this grows, the scene suddenly shifts to another location, something like the bottom of a bridge. There we see a guy standing in front of a portal. Standing in front of the portal, he is asked if he has come to buy a key. Upon hearing this, he replies that yes, and then he is told to stop talking nonsense and wasting time. Then he calls our hero inside. Once inside, he mentions that since he was introduced by Zen from the Zir Guild, he will be given permission to enter. Also, fighting is prohibited here, as if anyone tries to fight them, they will be punished by a high-level archmage. So if he doesn't want any trouble, he just has to follow orders. He agrees to this, and they move forward. As the protagonist moves on, he notices that the black market for adventurers is hidden so that they won't be pulled in by these angelic figures. He finds this quite clever. Hearing this, he is told that inside he can also find some high-level goods that are controlled by large corporations, especially the key to the dungeon. Zhu Yin conveyed that the MC will come for him. Before continuing, the protagonist takes a gold bar out of his pocket and hands it over to the adventurer. The adventurer then grabs him and comments that he is a newbie and doesn't know much about the rules here. However, giving him this gold is not necessarily a violation of any rules. Knowing this, he notes that it is nothing serious and the adventurer accepts the gift. Since there is a giant queue and it will take too long, the adventurer calls the protagonist over, saying that there is a shortcut. If he stays in this queue, it will take him several days to get the key. All the adventurers here are looking for the key, and it looks like the newbie is hunting for one too. First of all, he will give him a good educational program on dungeon keys. They are necessary for adventurers only after reaching level 10. He then explains that the dungeons are divided into different levels. The first is an easy level where no key is required. However, once a person reaches level 10, they will need keys, although the loot inside is quite poor and the monsters will be very easy to fight. Then there is another level, more difficult, where you can find much stronger monsters. Also, the items inside are very good. There are also herbs that help you reach level 20 much faster, but you must already be level 20 to enter this place. The next level is epic. Inside, adventurers will encounter balanced monsters with considerable strength. However, they will also find many valuable rewards, including great items. But to enter, you must be at least level 30 or higher. Finally, there is the legendary tier. The difficulty is extremely high, but the materials found are incredibly valuable. There is also a higher chance of finding higher tier resources. So after all this, he realizes that there must be a dungeon. Upon reaching level 40, he gets the key to dungeon 41. But level 40 is the current max. He comments that no dungeon has ever even reached level 41. Until today, no one has reached level 41. Therefore, the key is useless. This upset the protagonist. But he noticed that his companion did not tell him about the fifth type of dungeons. But of all those who visited that hellish level dungeon, no one could survive. He then asks everyone to stop talking and listen, so that everyone pays attention, because now he is going to start the auction of keys. So he shows the 10th level key and asks if anyone wants it. One person points and offers 50,000. He comments that he will pay 50,000 until another person steps in and offers 70,000. Then another girl offers 80,000. The auction continued and everyone was outbidding each other. The conductor looked at this girl and wondered where this girl came from. Meanwhile, the main character was busy with his calls. After all, it was he who called the girl and introduced her into these trades. When suddenly the satellite caught his attention and told him to choose that dungeon since a level 10 dungeon is possible for him. There one could enter by paying 100,000, and at the end the dungeon master would receive a profit of 200,000, not to mention the expenses for allied adventurers. After thinking twice, he realized that he shouldn't even consider an epic tier dungeon. As being only level 7, he wouldn't be able to clear it even in his dreams. Then someone steps in, offering 120,000. Hearing 120,000, the auctioneer points to him and announces that he is the new owner of the key. After this, several mages and adventurers approach him, saying that they could help him clear this dungeon. Then we see 2 of them follow that guy without thinking, and the companion is happy because now 3 idiots have stopped competing with them. Then the auctioneer points in another direction. Now there is another key to the elite dungeon. He claps his hands to get everyone's attention. Now that the previous key is sold, he will announce the next one. This next key will have a much higher value. This is an epic rank key for level 10. The starting price is 200,000. People in the area start commenting that it's not worth it. The price was high, and hiring adventurers would be quite expensive, as high-level adventurers were required. Some even leave, noting that there were guilds that only had high-level adventurers who went into such dungeons. So many people give up on it until some president comes along offering 500,000. Everyone was speechless upon hearing this, amazed by his generosity. The price was also generous, and everyone was confident that he would be able to accomplish this mission. The companion even comments that only he could do this, and that if anyone really wants to become strong, they should take an example from this guy. But then the scene shifts outside, where we see Zhu Ying mention that the old lizard will also be attending the event, wanting to purchase a key. However, first of all, he asks him if he recognizes him by chance. The protagonist's shadow comments that no, this president still doesn't recognize his face. Without even recognizing his face, the protagonist wonders why this man suddenly wanted to get this epic level key. To this, he replies to the protagonist that he recently went to the Temple of Angels and suddenly returned. Perhaps something spurred him on. Now, returning to the auction, he wonders if anyone will dare challenge him in this bidding war. Then someone raises their hand and announces that they will bid 600,000. At this point, the lizard wonders who this person was. This was the same demon girl. And because of this, he raises the amount to 1 million. As the price rises, the protagonist turns to the guy and asks why he is raising the price so much. He replies that it was an epic level dungeon. But after all, it's only level 10 and requires a lot of luck to claim a gigantic sum. Although the companion stopped his thoughts and his face became cunning, especially when he saw the protagonist's crazy face in front of him. But the scene returns to him, and eventually the lizard comes on stage, declaring that no one will give a sum greater than him. Suddenly, a new bet flies into his back, 1.5 million, which completely stuns him and everyone present there. He turns to her and is surprised because she has appeared again, and the woman smiles smugly at him. Then he raises the price to 2 million, but she increases it to 2.1 million. And so this figure continues to grow to 2, 3, 4 million. Now he realizes that she did all this on purpose, and if she was really just playing, he raises the bet to 5 million. After he says 5 million, everyone is speechless. In fact, at level 10, his movements are still much more arrogant. The key cost 200,000 at the beginning, and now the price has increased to 5 million. However, he wonders if she has the courage. Looking at her, she begins to say some things that make him think about life. After thinking for a while, he tries to find that girl. After a long search, he realizes that she is no longer around. She has disappeared. He runs outside and, as he runs out, turns to that guy and asks if he, by any chance, knows where that girl went. Realizing that this was all a setup to get him to spend all that money, he is left in limbo, understanding almost nothing. Now, if he were to meet this woman again by chance, he would definitely seek revenge, not only for the fact that she had essentially humiliated him in front of everyone, but also for making him spend all that money. Coming out of the dungeon now, the companion apologizes because it turns out that he brought him here in vain, and also for that crazy girl who came out of nowhere. However, he backs down and eventually says that he now has the protagonist's contact information. If a really good item appears, he will call the protagonist and they disappear. But she appeared next to the protagonist, the girl who's been deceiving that president all this time, and after she shows up, he celebrates, saying that what they did there with that lizard was simple. However, the girl was not worried about the money. If this money had ended up in their pockets, they would have been absolutely rich at that moment. But well, what she says makes perfect sense. Behind their backs, we see the man who says this. After this, she is surprised and realizes that it was the auctioneer from the past. What stuns her, until she realizes that he was also part of the demon clan. It is very likely that the protagonist did the same thing to him as he did to her. He agrees that it was, and so we reveal that the auctioneer was also a loyal servant of the main character. It was felt in his own aura, so he thought to use it to his advantage, which is not surprising since he suddenly started giving instructions to increase the auction price of that dungeon. And now he shows the card and comments that at the moment he has 4 million, because one is already for the contribution. We see the girl wondering what to do with that key. It was the only one available at the auction today, And now on the protagonist's account, he understands that he has a pretty good amount of money. A few minutes later, someone thanks him. Seeing this guy, he was a level 10 assassin, but now he managed to get the key much cheaper than when buying it at that auction house. But why is the key bought at the entrance to the dungeon cheaper? To this he replies that all of that man's groupmates died inside the dungeon, and it was pure luck that he managed to get out alive. And at this moment, the key he has is the only one in his hands. If it were by chance sold on the market, he could sell it for a very high price. Upon entering the dungeon, we notice a creature behind him, watching everything the protagonist did. But in the meantime, we see the president with that lizard. Seeing that the girl from the past has received a new key, and knowing that only 2 people entered there, he orders the 3 guards who were with him to enter with him. Pointing to them, Voni starts sweating and comments that fighting the 2 inside was easy, but fighting the president. He didn't want to go into the dungeon. It was difficult, but he had to enter. But the moment he tries to enter, a surprise awaits him. Upon entering, he receives a system message that the dungeon is full. However, they ask how it is full, considering that only moments ago, only 2 people entered. How could 3 more people enter without him even noticing? Seeing that they cannot enter, the guards behind him celebrate. However, the president turns around and says that they have no more time to waste here, because later they will focus on their own dungeons. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, we see the protagonist thanking his party for helping him reach level 10. However, now that he has reached level 10, he has good news for each of his shadows. From now on, each of them will be able to recruit their own followers. This is because upon reaching level 10, the system granted him a new ability. This ability allows his shadows to turn players or monsters into their own followers. His shadows immediately celebrate with joyful cries. Meanwhile, we see her looking at the first shadow that the protagonist acquired, asking if she was ashamed and if she was even listening. The protagonist still had something to say. However, the shadow replies that it is not ashamed, since there is a very good monster ahead, and the protagonist's shadow wants to get this particular shadow for itself. Now their goal is to look for small, strong, or weak servants, as the one who can gather the most followers will attract the attention of the protagonist. With these words, they all begin to disappear into the depths of the dungeon. Meanwhile, he wonders what is happening outside. Netahu comments that Chue took several members of his team to fight in his own dungeon. We also see that this guy has gained a new ability that allows him to hide so that no one can notice his presence. Now he will stay here to watch everything that is about to happen. Inside the dungeon, we see the same shadow of the protagonist, who notices that there are monsters ahead. These monsters mine ore, but one of the boss monsters senses the presence of the protagonist's shadow. This boss was a level 10 miner. Seeing the shadow, he points and orders the remaining guards to attack the mysterious intruder. As soon as he says this, we see them all flying towards the shadow. In fact, fighting them was troublesome, so he decides to use skill fusion. Now he uses his searing fire as before, but this time there is something else behind it. It was that same poison. This poison completely envelops him. Moments later, the poison, mixed with his fire, spreads towards the miners. Then we witness the destruction it causes. All the miners were exterminated and defeated by that girl's ability. However, the moment he realizes that someone has stolen his kills and his shadows, he becomes irritated. Then he turns around and starts blaming her too. She almost killed him too, but he had a shield, so there was no need to worry about that. However, the girl looks ahead and comments that someone has appeared and interfered with her plans. The summons that were supposed to go to the first protagonist's shadow were instead summoned by another protagonist's shadow. At that moment, he turns around and yells at him to stop stealing his shadows. However, the other one completely ignores the protagonist's first shadow and orders his new shadows to follow him, as he needed to farm experience. This gives the protagonist more experience. The more experience they get, the more attention he pays to them. Meanwhile, all the experience went to the protagonist. It just kept growing. While all this was happening, we also saw elsewhere how some guys were destroying weaker monsters, like some giant mutant cockroaches. After they eliminated them one by one, suddenly the same president appears from behind. He immediately starts complaining, saying that these players are too weak. They have the assassin classification, but what's the point? If he, the president, weren't here, everyone would be dead. So he orders them to at least follow him. They obey and move forward, eventually reaching the level 10 boss. So this boss that appeared was easily defeated by the protagonist's shadow. After everyone has been defeated, we see them all lying on the ground. And behind them, we find the protagonist who has just arrived. He realizes that his shadows have become much stronger during this time. Not only that, he could be lying somewhere to the side, doing nothing, and still level up. Now the guy had just reached level 11. But when he put his hand in front of the boss, he noticed how weak he was, which he didn't want at the moment. However, just when he was thinking that he didn't want to absorb these shadows, a portal appeared right in front of him. As soon as he appeared, he commanded the shadows behind him to take over the prey. Once everything is mined, it's easy. Just go back to Earth, hit the black market, and sell it all for a good price. Having made this whole plan, he left the portal. Then in the next portal, his shadows were able to easily kill a strong boss. Elsewhere, other shadows destroyed weaker monsters. Thus, the main character continued to quickly level up inside the epic dungeon. He realized that the dungeon was too easy. At first, he thought it would be difficult. At that moment, he had already reached level 19. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the scene switches to one of the bosses holding a warrior by the head. This warrior who was being held was calling for help because the boss who captured him was level 14. With no choice, we see the president move his hand forward and, in an instant, he manages to destroy this boss. Along with him, he also destroyed several weaker guards that were interfering with his farm. After defeating the monster, he turns to the group and starts complaining again. They had finally reached level 15, but looking back, he saw that only 2 of those hunters remained. At that moment, he even wondered why he hired these people, because he was single-handedly carrying the entire team. However, one of the characters in the background calls out to the president and asks him to look back. He turns around in confusion, and he sees the monster's leg appearing. It was a slightly higher level boss, but we weren't shown his level. This suggests that it was the boss who entered this territory on his own. The president even wondered if there was some kind of seal in this portal. But to put an end to this nonsense, he attacked the monster with one of his forces. The attack hit him straight, sending him crashing into the ground. After he crushed it, he immediately began to celebrate. The president was already rejoicing, because after such an attack, it should have been impossible for this monster to escape unharmed. So, at that moment, to make sure whether he had really defeated it, he came closer to take a look. But once he got there, a surprise awaited him. The monster still stood there, looking at him rather meekly, while smoke and dust filled the air. But our scene moves to another place on Earth. Now we see someone coming out of the portal, and meanwhile some guy at the checkout is surprised, seeing that the one who came out was not the president. And our main character, since it wasn't him, he ends up asking the guy to stop because, well, he was leaving and there was something that needed to be done. Commission. He couldn't pass without paying the commission. The protagonist, who no longer cared, wonders what's up with this guy. What guild is he from? If he knew, he would be shocked. He was from the famous Red Scorpion Guild. Their leader was crazy, rushing into any dungeon he could find just to level up. However, the main character, already tired of these guys, eventually says that if by chance he refuses to pay, then the guy reveals that if he does not pay, they will beat him so badly that he will not even be able to walk. But as soon as he opened his eyes to say this, something flew past, catching the protagonist's attention. He points out that maybe the one who was supposed to beat him up was actually the one flying. So he decides to look up, and he gets a surprise. It was the president. He flew out of the portal, crashing into the trees. Then we see what really did it to him. It was that mysterious BOSS. The heroes were simply shocked by this turn of events. He jumped out and was now heading towards the protagonist, who was still in the middle of a conversation with that guy. His jump was incredible. He jumped out of the portal straight onto the mountain. Now at the top of the mountain, we see that his blow was so powerful that the whole mountain shook. Seeing all this, the guy just retreats because it was terrifying. The boss escaped from the dungeon. He even begged the protagonist to run away, because if he stayed here, he would definitely die. While he was begging, the scene shifted to another place. The people who were in the forest all started to run away. They didn't want to stay there because they received a message that a very powerful boss had appeared. After everyone has escaped, we return to the boss. He looked at the president, who was lying on the ground. Now we see the boss decide to put his hand on the ground. And having done this, he pulls a giant stone out of the ground. Then with this stone, he picks it up and throws it towards the president. Seeing this, the president understands that things are bad. This huge stone was getting closer and closer to him. And to keep him from being crushed, a figure appears in the background, an adventurer using her fire magic. Her attack was strong enough to explode the stone. The one who did this was a slender adventurer, level 30, and the president of the ST Guild. The knight standing behind her is speechless, seeing that their president didn't even have time to see the boss's attack, while she successfully hit him from a long distance. But she wasn't done yet. She still hadn't managed to completely defeat the boss. Meanwhile, the scene switches back to the president. He was completely defeated until he saw someone appear in the shadows. Seeing this figure approaching, he realizes that it is an ally. It was also the protagonist's companion, his former comrade. He even asks if the fallen president is not ashamed to lie like that on the ground. The president, still on the ground, asks if he has defeated him. However, his goal was not to save him. He was a hunter who relied on weapons and traps to deal with anything, and yet he managed to neutralize one of the boss's strongest attacks. It was amazing, but what really scared him was that he couldn't see his level. He even thought that he might be a cheater. Only that could explain everything. But at that moment, he looks up just in time to see one of the stones flying towards him. It hits him right in the face. Meanwhile, we see the boss rushing towards him. But before the attack could reach its target, something hit the boss right in the face. The one who did this was an archer who used a long-range attack. Since Julian managed to land a direct hit on the boss's face, the boss just jumps, leaving another crater in the mountain after his jump, and rushing with incredible speed towards the archer. The archer, seeing him approaching, grabs another arrow, but this arrow was trapped. This trap was just a net, a magical net. This net eventually catches the boss. The boss, once caught, simply couldn't move anymore, which eventually caused him to crash face first into a mountain. Meanwhile, he asked the protagonist to release his other demonic form, because in this form he becomes stronger. The protagonist admits that he will indeed become stronger, but he cannot show his strength now because there are many spectators. The shadow had a good option. If he doesn't want people to see him, it's better to kill them. The protagonist refuses, saying that he wants people to watch everything as simple spectators. However, the boss manages to get out of the network and climb to the top where the protagonist's shadow is. But the shadow is one step ahead. Thorns appear from the ground, and they hit the boss, immobilizing him for a few moments. While this only delays him for a short time, it also deals minor damage to him. Not much, but still something. The Minotaur was level 24 and enraged. While strategies are being created to defeat the boss, we see the guild from the past watching. They realize that this boss is 4 levels higher than that hunter. The knight next to them remarks that it is very likely that he will lose, but there is a chance that he can win if he uses good strategies. For example, she once defeated a boss with an attack power 3 times higher than her own, but that was a special case since she was chosen among the best. It was unlikely that the low-ranking guy down there would have the same chance as her. However, something about his words surprised her. She even wonders if that adventurer can really withstand all that power. Meanwhile, the scene returns to them. He runs, and as he runs, he activates his traps at full speed. Moments later, the traps disappear from sight, but the boss accidentally activates one. When activated, an explosion occurs. However, even this is not enough to defeat the boss. The strategy he uses is good. He just wants to wear down the boss, but he's too naive. At this point, we see the boss activate his rage mode. Now he runs even faster than before. The more enraged he becomes, the faster he moves. In order to escape, Julian activates another trap, which binds the boss to the ground. When the boss takes a step forward, both of his legs become stuck in a sticky trap. But he does not give up his attempts and tries to get out of this black resin. Now that the boss is immobilized, the protagonist's shadow takes his bow and begins aiming at the boss, who is trying to break free. A bunch of arrows start hitting the Minotaur's body. Meanwhile, one of the observers comments that the trap was not bad, but the real problem is his aim. All in vain with such shooting. However, another girl objects that it was not that simple. It was at this moment that one of the arrows hit the boss. But these weren't just regular arrows, they were modified. When the arrows pierce the monster, sparks begin to fly. Moments later, there is a powerful explosion, leaving the knight and the unknown girl stunned. They couldn't believe how powerful the effect was. But that's not all. The sadistic demon looks towards the explosion. He sees only smoke, nothing else. But the two watching from behind shout at him not to lose concentration, as this is not the end yet. Looking up, we see the boss. He jumped. Now he was rushing straight towards the adventurer, and it was very likely that he had been struck. With one blow, the boss sends the protagonist's shadow flying. He is thrown into the trees. what prevents him from flying even further than he has already flown. He then uses his own trap to catch himself. Now he is held by his own device. At this moment she appears, another shadow of the protagonist, and he asks her to help. And she was waiting for only one thing, for him to ask for help. And only after a moment does he finally say that he needs her help. Then she starts. She moves her hands because here he should hold his breath. Being the arrogant guy he is, he ends up saying that he dies in her arms, and the poison that she threw spreads throughout the forest. The monster finds himself surrounded by all this poison, but he already knew a way to dispel it. That's why he spreads his arms out to the sides. And only after that does he collect it in one hand, creating a kind of shockwave. The blow was so strong that it managed to completely disperse all the poison around him. Meanwhile, two adventurers watching the battle are surprised by the poisonous fog. But now we see the boss looking at the place where the trap was, in the shadow of the dark figure. Not knowing where it is, he continues to try to look at it, but nothing happens, except that traps are flying in his direction again. These dark things came closer to him, and then he set them on fire. And then a huge bada-boom occurs, leaving the demon no chance to survive.